right, welcome back to the Present Life Podcast. My name's Aaron. I'm here as usual with AJ, and we're going to get right into it today because we have a lot to cover, and honestly, we're trying to keep these episodes a little bit more succinct, but honestly, we'll see how that goes today. We're talking Israel and Palestine, so a lot of complex things, but we're going to get into what is the real history of the land of Israel. When did Palestine come into existence, and how has it evolved, as well as Islam? What does the Bible say about Israel and its future? And honestly, maybe the most important question, what do we do with this information as Christians or just as citizens of this world? So let's get into it. This is the real history, I believe, is compiled from the Bible. Also, historian and author Bill Federer, and some various other sources to kind of provide some context and facts. So let's start in Genesis 15:4, and I'm going to roll for a little bit here, AJ. But
Do it. I'm ready for it.
God says Abraham's heir will come from his wife Sarah, and later on in that chapter, Abraham's promised the land from the Nile all the way to the Euphrates. So right now, that's modern day eastern Egypt and Israel, Jordan, parts of Lebanon and Syria, northern Saudi Arabia, and half of Iraq. And so that was in 2000 BC. So that's 3,000 years ago. So that's when this promise starts. And, well, God fulfills his promises. We talk about prophecies. 78% of all the prophecies in the Bible have already been fulfilled. And the only reason the other 22% haven't been is because we're not to the end of the story yet.
Yeah.
And so, speaking of promises, Abraham and Sarah get a little impatient on that promise of a child. And so Sarah recommends that he sleep with his servant Hagar. She gets pregnant, Sarah gets jealous, and Hagar runs away. Hagar is visited by an angel who tells her to go back and she'll be blessed, and to call her son Ishmael, which means God hears. She's excited about that, but the interesting part is she names the Lord El Roy, meaning the God who sees me. And she's actually the only one in the Bible who renames Yahweh. And that's actually a custom associated with possession or authority over the one who is named, which is interesting because it kind of reminds me of, all of the other religions in the world that kind of change God's name, change God's quality. Reminds me also of the He Gets Me ad from the Super Bowl. So back to Sarah. Sarah gives birth to Isaac. Later, Ishmael mocks or persecutes Isaac. So Ishmael and Hagar are driven away. But still, God says he will bless Ishmael, but in a different way than Isaac. He says, your offspring will be traced through Isaac. That's Genesis 21:12. Eventually, Isaac has twins, Jacob and Esau, and you might know that story, but basically God tells his wife Rebekah that the older will serve the younger. Older meaning Esau will serve Jacob. Esau then sells his birthright basically for a pot of stew. Jacob is a little bit deceitful and kind of takes that birthright, but it's all part of God's plan. Yes, God uses our sin still for good. And so God already knew kind of what person Esau was going to become and would turn into. But here's the problem. Esau always felt kind of cheated, and that mentality has passed through generations. And that's kind of what we see here today still. On top of that, then Esau actually marries two of Ishmael's daughters, and the bloodlines are mixed. So Esau and Ishmael, those lines are basically two lines of, hey, we were cheated out of our inheritance, which was actually never their inheritance. And that's the biggest issue of deceit, I would say, that exists in these religions and also in this kind of history story.
So you would say that jealousy.
Jealousy. I mean, we saw it we talk Cain and Abel. It's always this jealousy. It's what I deserve, but guess what? We deserve nothing.
Yeah.
It's God's promise, and it's up to him. He's the author of the story, right? So what most people don't address is that Esau actually forgave Jacob 20 years later, but unfortunately his descendants didn't forget, and they didn't forgive. So now let's go through about 2,000 years worth of history real quick here.
Let's do it. Hit us.
So, but that's the basis. And the kingdom of Israel came into existence in 1000 BC. The Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom in 722. Babylonians destroyed the northern kingdom, destroyed the southern kingdom then in 586 BC, which was prophesied in Jeremiah that this would happen, and it would be for 70 years. And guess what? 70 years later, they return to the land, 515. So then the Roman Empire takes over. The city and the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. Mount Vesuvius erupts 9 years later, which is followed by plagues. Just a reminder that if you go against God, usually doesn't work out for you. And The Bar Kokhba revolt is in 135 AD. This is when the Jews of Judea actually revolt against the Romans who are in power, and they get destroyed. Jews are killed from door to door, and Emperor Hadrian, he's a Roman, and he's an enemy of the Jews. He hates them, and he renames the land Syria Palestina, or Palestina. Prior to that, the land was known as Judea, and this is the first instance of anything close to the name Palestine. So that's kind of where that came from, but still, that area was not called Palestine. So let's keep on rolling. 500 years later, Islam then comes around in 600s AD. Thousands of years later, the Second Great Awakening in America and England, people started to see that the Jews had to be in Jerusalem for certain biblical prophecies to be fulfilled. And so they actually started going around to synagogues and trying to convince Jews to return to Israel. So some of them from all around the world start doing that. They start buying parcels of land in the Ottoman Empire and kind of creating these farming communities. Fast forward another 200 years or so, during World War II, Britain, they're running short on explosives. So this Jew from Russia is a chemist named Chaim Weizmann. He goes to England. He actually turns breweries to make acetone. He helps this war effort, helps them create bombs. And to thank them, they wanted to make him a knight. But he's like, how about a home for my people? And that's Israel. And that's where things get sticky here in the 1900s. But during that time, once again, deceit, Lawrence of Arabia actually was meeting with the Arabs to see if they were willing to help the British defeat the Turks. And he promises the Arabs that if they defeat the Turks, they'll get all the land in the Middle East. But he knowingly lied. He actually admitted in his biography in 1922. And so the British win. They give the land to the Jews. And according to the boundaries that God had given Moses, and obviously Arabs are pissed. And so Britain takes Iraq, which is gotten from the Ottoman Empire. They take this Sharif of Mecca's son, Faisal, and make him king of Iraq. But he thought he should have Syria too, but that was controlled by France. And so Winston Churchill steps in and he decides to take 2/3 of the land that had been given to the Jews and put Faisal's brother Abdullah in charge and call it Jordan. So that's where we get Jordan today. In 1922, also, British start limiting the Jewish immigration into the Holy Land. And 2 years later, the British flip on the Sharif of Mecca, and then they let the Saud family take over Arabia. And this is where things get violent. If you didn't know about this term Wahhabi, Sauds are Wahhabi, and Wahhabism is basically what every terrorist group traces back to. It's basically anyone who's not our type of Muslim must die. And so the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928 is started, and the Quran is their constitution. And this is their two-step plan, and has been for almost 100 years now. Infiltrate countries, pretending that you're just a religious Muslim, and then when the signal is given, boom, become a political, militant Muslim. So 3 years later, the king of Jordan, that guy Abdullah, he was a moderate Muslim, so he's assassinated by Palestinian terrorists because he's not intense enough. And then later that decade, 1938, oil is actually discovered in Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia in one generation go from the poorest Muslim country to the richest. And now they have billions of dollars to export Wahhabism, this violent Muslim narrative. And so World War II starts, Muslim leaders meet with Hitler, they confirm their hatred of the Jews, and they raise a group to fight alongside Hitler. Luckily, we get through World War II, but the Jews didn't have a state until 1948. Once again, prophesied in the Bible in Isaiah 66:8, says, Who has heard of such a thing? Who has seen such things? Can a land be born in one day, or a nation be delivered in an instant? Yeah. And so they were immediately then attacked by a neighboring Arab nations. And so the interesting thing about this, too, is people that lived in the Palestinian area at that time were really nomads. The land wasn't worth a whole lot. The Israelites, they were the ones who really had the knowledge of agriculture and being able to build that up. So Israel then, the next couple decades, brought a lot of prosperity to this current Palestinian region. But 64, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, was founded. In 10 years, they were then recognized as the sole representation of the Palestinian people. And then 4 years later, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat signed a treaty with the Prime Minister of Israel. They actually get the Nobel Peace Prize for bringing these regions together and creating peace, but no one from the Muslim Brotherhood likes that. It's not intense enough. It's not hating of Jews enough, honestly. And so they actually had infiltrated the military, and they assassinate Sadat during a parade. They basically are parading down, they turn on him, and just open fire. And then 10 years later, Hamas is founded. And so rather than just not like the Jews in Israel, their whole goal is to eradicate Jews. Basically, everyone is too moderate for Hamas. 20 years later, 2006, Hamas took over the government. They haven't had an election since, so they've just been running things however they want to as dictators, essentially. Right now, I mean, their leaders live in Qatar, at least I think since 2016. And this is where generations and generations of people have felt, quote, cheated of the land, which according to God was never theirs in the first place. But according to their God, Allah, and this is in Quran Surah 354, it says Allah is the best of all deceivers. So they serve a God that is the God of all deception. And so when we see that there's so much difficulty in understanding this conflict and understanding what side to be on, well, guess what? We have one side, well, our side, for example, and that is following a God who's not the author of confusion, is the author of the story, is an author of a clear-headed mind, but they're serving a God that is the God of all and best of all deceivers and deception. And that's where we are here. Thoughts?
Oh, man. No, I mean, when you believe what we believe in, it's pretty clear. I would say the holes in that, like you said, deception is for us Antichrist, and they first off they thought Jesus was just another prophet, just someone that was trying to lead people to their God.
This line is actually them trying to say that they want to persecute Jesus.
Well, yeah, and he was a Jew, so I'm sure they did. And
Totally.
and they also don't believe in the Trinity. They believe that Allah is one God. They thought that they consider the Holy Spirit, if you will, the angel Gabriel, is how they view that. But we believe in a God of forgiveness and love and chance after chance after chance until the day you die to be redeemed and saved and shown grace and mercy and love. And they're killing their own because they aren't vicious enough or evil enough. I mean, they would. I don't even know.
Yeah, because they don't hate enough.
They don't hate enough. I mean, it's really sad. And I was talking to you before we started here. While Mr. Meyer Media, shout out to our media guy, Meyer Media, in the house. We were talking a little bit about some of the research I did, and the goal here for Islam is to at some point completely take over the world, rule with an iron fist. I was telling you that it's not a religion of composition. It's a religion of imposition, like you were saying, like convert or die. And so they are infiltrating all over the world. Including our country. They're crossing the border everywhere now. If you just follow, I wouldn't say the media, but it's showing all over that people from Syria and people from Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran and are coming over in groves, and groups of military-aged men are infiltrating our country. Well, that's their goal, and their job is to come over here and just have kids and have kids and have kids and have kids and indoctrinate.
Yeah, they're not converting a ton. They're just having more babies.
More babies. And what are we doing over here? We're castrating our children, and we are aborting our children, and we're pushing that. And so they're going to get to the point where, I guess how they're viewing it is, hey, if we can rule the future, we can rule the world. And that's the direction we're headed. And when you look at the prophecies in Revelation and whatnot, it makes sense that they're going to take over, they're going to rule with an iron fist, and then it will make way for a king to rise up. And that's when we get into Antichrist, the Antichrist story. That's what I believe is happening. That's what we can see happening if you know the ins and outs of this stuff. But I'm not as educated on this as you are, clearly. You did some extensive research, and that was so educational. I listened to a podcast on this recently that really went through all of that. But what a situation. I mean, like you said about the prophecy of Israel, just popping up and all that type of stuff. In 1948, how that worked, there was deception in that. It's been really interesting to learn about. But what I know is that our Bible, our belief is that we must always support Israel. That is the Holy Land. Israel gave birth to Jesus. We talked about that in the previous episode. It's no wonder the world hates Israel because she gave birth to Jesus Christ, our Savior. So it's that was, I appreciate you doing the research and sharing that, because I hope people listen and go back and rewatch that, because that is extremely educational, and it really does have a lot to do with the direction everything's headed. It's not scary. It's sad and it's eye-opening, especially with what's going on in this country. But You better know Jesus.
Yeah. One and you know and as scary as it is too, there's I don't know, I believe there should be a lot of hope in it as well because it's not like God didn't know this was going to happen.
Yeah.
It's all laid out. He knew that these things would occur, and whether it's 10 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, whatever it is, I mean, I don't know. I hope we don't have to live through that in some way, but
Mhm.
also it'd be pretty awesome if we were here when Jesus came back.
Yeah.
If we could survive that physically, emotionally. But yeah, back to supporting Israel. I think that's the tough part that a lot of pastors, a lot of politicians, a lot of just people in general right now are dealing with. Is no, do we support everything that Israel does? I don't believe that we should. However, should we support Israel having the land? Yes, because that's what I mean, Genesis 12:3. That's what we're supposed to do, and that's
Mhm.
what God has promised to them. And remember, God does not break his promises. He comes through with all of his promises. Otherwise, we don't have a God.
Yeah.
We have their God, who's the God of all deception.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that we worship a God of all deception. And I just think, if you saw people in the last, I feel like a few months or so being going on TikTok or Instagram being like, oh, I'm starting to read through the Quran. This is going to be amazing. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're going to find out some interesting things if you
Yeah.
actually get past page 10. Because, especially some of the people who were saying those things were from the LGBT community, which they would be killed in that particular community.
Yeah.
They would be ostracized, marginalized, hated. And so, yeah, we might have different opinions as Christians about that group or about some of these groups, but that doesn't mean we hate them.
Yeah.
That just means we tell them the truth, which they hate, unfortunately.
And then and that's listen, going through that currently in a certain life situation. But you're right. I mean, I remember when all this started happening and all these LGBT groups around the country were like LGBT for Hamas. It's like, do you understand that if you were standing in front of these people supporting them,
Yeah.
they would kill you?
Mhm.
Like that the level of confusion and just I don't even know, self-deception. I have no idea. The level of confusion in that is mind-blowing to me.
Mhm.
It's like you're literally supporting someone who hates you. Like what?
Yeah.
Like in that way. And we support and love people who hate us. I wouldn't say support. We
Yeah,
love people.
absolutely.
We love people who hate us because we're called to do so because of the truth, because we live by the truth that they hate, like you
Mhm.
said. But something that I found very interesting in my research as well was that it talked about how Muhammad, who was obviously the biggest piece of all of this coming to be, said that he was visited by an angel of light.
Mhm.
And then if you take that to the Bible talks about it says, and no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light.
Yeah.
And it's very clear, and the Bible does this all the time. It gives you the answer. It shows you what's going on. It essentially blows up and destroys these other religions just by going through it and understanding it. And so that I found very interesting, which touches on your point that the God of deception. That's literally Satan.
Well,
Satan is a
and
deceiver.
Muhammad, I haven't read his biography, but I was listening to a guy who was talking about his biography, and Muhammad actually, in his autobiography later on in his life, wrote the fact that when that angel came to him, he didn't know where it came from.
Yeah.
He didn't know whether it was God or the devil or what side it was on, but like he was convinced that it was the truth.
Yeah.
Well, how often does that happen to
Yeah.
us? How often do you think like, well, who's talking to me on this year? Who's talking to me on this year? Well, maybe it's whatever makes you feel better, whatever gives you power, whatever sometimes gives you a feeling of content or joy or whatever it is, or I should say happiness. It's not probably joy.
Yeah.
But that's where we are here. We talked about like our society, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, life great, liberty great, pursuit of happiness. No, that's from the enemy.
Yeah.
That's selfishness, and so it's really, really hard to decipher and tell the difference between those two voices
Yeah.
because often they can sound very similar. And I'll digress for a second. Like, I've struggled with alcohol in my life, and one of the things that I found when I drink alcohol, I have sometimes these little kind of they're not actually goosebumps, but they're kind of this feeling of like, oh, and I get these like little tiny bumps kind
Yeah.
of in my being, and I found that when I'm worshiping and when I worship music, it's very, very similar. And when I'm worshiping the Lord and I'm like, oh, there's such like it's a fine line but a big difference between
Yeah.
something that is giving me life and that is pretending to, but it's really stripping it away.
Yeah.
It's
That's
crazy, man.
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting how that works. But yeah, man, ultimately, we are called to, like you said, to be in support of Israel, not necessarily agree with everything they're doing, but be in support of them because of what's to come,
Mhm.
what we understand is to come.
And what the Bible says. And let's keep going with that. What does the Bible say about Israel and its future? One of the biggest things that stood out to me is from Zechariah. It's 12, 2 through 9. It basically talks about the fact that Jerusalem is going to be a cup of staggering. And it's going to trip up a lot of nations. And look at what we see now. There's so many battles and fights and just negative actions and thoughts and behaviors surrounding that place. And it says on that day, though, that basically it is taken over. Those people that took it over will be cursed; they will be injured, but also that God will destroy all nations that come against Jerusalem. So this is a long play.
Oof.
We don't know when that's going to come, but that's the word of the Lord. And so I'm going to trust in the word of the Lord. I mean, he also
Yeah.
says, Isaiah 11:12, when Jesus sets up his reign of the earth, he will gather dispersed of Israel from all the four corners of the earth. He who scattered Israel will gather them as a shepherd keeps his flock. That's from Jeremiah. And but it also says, Ezekiel 38:8, in the last years you will enter a land that has been restored from war and regathered from many peoples to the mountains of Israel. So there's going to be a lot of death.
Yeah.
It's a
Yep.
really unfortunate thing, and we've already seen it now. We saw it October 7th. We continue to see it the last 3-4 months here, and no one wants that. When we're sitting here, we're not saying, we're super excited or behind any Palestinians dying or any Israelis dying, especially women, children, innocent people, which there are a lot of those.
Yeah.
But it's not our plan.
Yeah.
We didn't write this book. If we wrote this book, it'd be all fluffy angels and rainbows and unicorns and stuff like that, and nothing would really get done.
Yeah.
But when like God is the author here, let him write the book.
Yeah.
Well, he already has.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, your notes talk about it here. It goes on and it actually gives a pretty clear picture of who's gonna come against Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, it says, I mean, Ezekiel 38:8 says, when Gog, which is the title of Russia, with Persia, which is Iran, Cush, which is Ethiopia, and Put, Libya, Gomer, Turkey, comes against the land of Israel. These are all of these lands that are going to come. Basically, every country or land or nation, whatever it's going to look like at that point. Maybe there will only be 5 countries because there will be so much of them taking over or
Yeah.
just kind of conglomerating, if you will.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. And it's not that but once again, just because something is destined to happen doesn't mean you don't sit here like we are right now and fight against it, and do everything you possibly can. Like there's too much of that going on in our country, of just, well, it'll just happen, or what can I do? It's like, well, you can stand. I mean, we are called as Christians to be political in so many ways, and
Mhm.
that was something I avoided for a long time because I just wanted to kind of do my own thing and just worship Jesus on my own. But that's not what we're called to do. That's not what you're called to do. You're called to stand. You're called to speak. We saw it in Nazi Germany. Like the Christians and the church didn't speak up, and it was too long. It took too long, and then they were getting attacked, and they're like, well, it's not us. They were getting attacked. Well, it's not us. They were getting attacked, and now once you got attacked, there was no one there to help you.
Yeah.
There was no one there to support you. So if you're a Christian listening to this right now, I hope you get a little bit of fire lit under you, because you can no longer be quiet. You are not called to be quiet. I'm gonna get emotional. It's just it's time.
Yeah.
And it could happen anytime. And so we got to be ready. We got to be ready for Jesus to come back. We got to be ready for to defend our faith, and that's why I think it's important for us to all, as Christians too, step into a realm of apologetics. You need to know what you believe and why you believe it, because if you don't have the armor. You don't have the armor of God, but you also don't have an armor in any conversations, in discipleship. And that's what we're called to do, not just love God, love our neighbors, but we're called to go make disciples. So go make them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I'm glad you touched on that and brought that up, because people are probably listening like, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm just a random person in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, you said it. It's time to, and I've said it like week after week. Like, pick a side. Pick a side, understand what that means, and the side we choose, once again, continue to reiterate it. We will reiterate it probably weekly. Love, forgiveness, showing people mercy, showing Christ. It's not your job to necessarily go out, stand on the corner and preach the word. That's not what we're saying to do. We're saying to, where God has you, love in that.
Mm-hmm.
Live in light and plant seeds and let God harvest. That's what he'll do. Your job is to love and plant seeds. And I talked about it last week. That's why I've converted my old media stuff into a ministry page now.
Yeah.
It's a ministry page, because I have just continued to get educated, and as we do this and whatnot, and it's just, there's nothing else that matters in this life than what's going to happen after this life. We believe in Jesus, which means we know we're going to heaven. There's no question about it. The Bible says, just believe. And then you've said it before, if you believe, you're going to crave a relationship, and you aren't going to continue to crave sin. That will fade away. And I'm currently going through certain things that I've struggled with that are starting to fall off. And I actually listened to church yesterday at home with my wife. We did a church on TV, and it was about Jacob and Esau.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, buddy.
And we went through that, and the message was, if you continue to hold on to things from the past and things that you've struggled with, you won't be able to grab on to what God has for you moving forward. Right, my guy Meyer? Yeah, you smiling over there. I see you.
Well, even just now that you said that, I'm like, even literally, if you're holding on to one thing and you need two hands to grab another thing,
yeah,
you can't grab it.
Yes.
And so I like that visual too.
Well, and it's the whole rear view mirror thing. It's like, how can you drive straight ahead or drive forward and move forward when your eyes are in the rear view mirror? You crash. You crash and burn.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens. And that's hard to do. It's been extremely difficult for me to do in multiple areas of my life, which I won't get into. But what we're supposed to do, what you're supposed to do, folks, is you're supposed to live selflessly. How can I affect others positively, and how can I show them Jesus? And what Jesus equals is everything that we always talk about that list from episode 1,
Mm-hmm.
love, light, kindness, gentleness, all those things. And it can be difficult because the world is coming at you with everything that's anti that. And, but in John 16:33, it says, in this life, in this world, you are going to have troubles, but take heart. I have overcome the world.
Totally.
So it's going to come.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen. But it also says in Romans, I work all things together for good for those who love me. We understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw something on Instagram just on the way over here. It says, if you're not struggling with sin as a believer, then I'm worried about you. There needs to be struggle. We are told there's going to be struggle, and through that struggle is where the greatest things happen. And so we have hope in Christ. This life is not about now; it's about forever, which is heaven or hell. And that's what we're supposed to do. We know we're going to heaven as believers. That's one of the reasons we're doing this, to help plant seeds and help people understand that you're not supposed to be quiet. You're not supposed to sit back. You're supposed to get out there, pick a side, and love and live. And God will take care of the rest, because that's who he is.
Yeah, and be on God's side. We say, is God on our side? No. let's hope God that we're on God's side.
Yeah.
And and so
That was a quote, but you shared that.
it was Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Great
And
quote.
so I
Honest
think, like,
Abe.
yeah. I mean, and what should we do? Yes, we should be on God's side here. But like for those of you out here who get all this information or don't or whatever, and you're sitting there being like, well, what should I do? Should I take down my Free Palestine thing on Instagram? Should I put up an Israel flag? No, like we need to pray and we need to love, especially for the Arabs, and we need to evangelize them.
Yes.
Because they're like many of these religions, they're following a false doctrine and a god of deception. So we need to pray for them. We need to evangelize to them and let them know truth. We also, like I said before, we need to support Israel having the land. That doesn't mean we need to support all they do. They're technically not a saved nation. They don't believe, or Jews don't believe in Christ as our Redeemer and as God. But we also need to pray for peace in Jerusalem. If you want a prayer, it's in Psalm 122, 6-9. It says, "Pray for the well-being of Jerusalem." Quote, "May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls, security within your fortresses. Because of my brothers and friends, I will say, quote, may peace be in you. Because of the house of our Lord, I will pursue your prosperity." Don't stop. There's so many people that you think, oh, they just got another religion. Oh, they got their own thing. It's if you have something to say, your silence is a lie.
Yep.
And I think we need to pray also that the U.S. is going to turn back to God. I mean, I'm a public school teacher. We don't get to talk about God. We don't get to use the authority and the greatest authority and resource that has ever been made in the Bible. We don't get to use it as a resource and authority. And I think we need to pray the U.S. turns back to God. We need to pray for politicians that they be led by the Spirit of God and not by a spirit of deception. Yeah. And so that's what we should do. So there's your checklist.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw out one more thing as we finish here. There's a story out of the Middle East that has gained some traction in the last couple of weeks about 200 Muslim men who all in the same night had Jesus come to them.
Yeah,
and
a lot of visions.
And they all turned to Christianity.
Which gives me goosebumps right now.
Yeah. That's something that continues to pop up on my feed and whatnot. It's really interesting, but the Bible does say that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And like you said, we do need to pray for those people and hope that they see the truth, because the devil is the deceiver. And you said these other religions there are deception. It's interesting to me as you say that. What pops in my head is that all of these other religions that have been deceived, one way or another, Jesus is involved. Right? Are you talking like Buddhism, Hinduism, Mormonism? Obviously, we're talking about Islam and all that. Jesus, one way or another, is part of the story. But for us, we can look back knowing the truth, and we can see and actually call out as we sit here and talk about. We could do an episode on Mormonism. Maybe we will. I'm passionate for the people of the LDS Church, but there's a lot of deception in that, and talking about it is going to get people very upset. Yeah. But listen, I've got the armor of God on, and I know whose I am. I know who I am. I know whose I am, and I know who's in me, and nobody wants that smoke.
Yeah.
So anyway,
hey, like if we haven't said before, the gospel can be offensive.
Yes.
But there's a fine line, but a big difference between love and approval, and we might not approve of even the things that we do. We certainly don't approve of all the things that you guys maybe do out there, but we love you, and we love our God more than anything else. And so I think that's where we'll wrap up today.
Yeah.
But we might, I'm sure we'll come back to this. And honestly, too, I would love if you have questions, if you have arguments, if you have, I don't know, whatever you want to say about this particular topic. We'd love to hear that. Send us a message on Instagram, send us a message, comment on YouTube, whatever you want to do, so that we can, tackle this issue further, because it's not over. It's not going to be over till Jesus comes back. And we want to be cognizant of that and mindful of that and helpful in our speech. So love you guys. We're going to pray for you guys all too. And it's time to, live in the present, but pray for the future, right?
Yeah. There you go.
All right, have a great day.